I'm Gina Fitt, and you've either surfed to or purposely selected Life Talk with Vern Moses. Welcome to another in our ongoing series of verbal essays, brought to you in this television format. Vern, we've been discussing over the past few weeks the bereavement and how that stops people in their lives, in their careers, in their relationships, and last week was just so fascinating for me as you discussed some of the things we can do to go through the process of grieving for losses in our lives. And we specifically focused on death. But you had mentioned to me we're going to talk about other kinds of loss and what things people can do to get through that.
See, all of these processes will be applicable to all the causes, if you would, of bereavement. I do think there's a lot more to say about the heaviest one of all, or seemingly so. Except, you know, a person going through divorce sometimes or separation feel like it's worse than death because the loved one is still out there, you know, perhaps with someone else, and that's incredibly painful. But I would say, normally speaking, other than public speaking, that death is right up there, you know, with number one, and how to manage that. And so what I'd like to do is kind of delve deeper into that. Some things that we could do, should do, must do really, in order to come out of the experience with the healthiest mind possible and with the brightest possible future. And I think even certainly the deceased would want that normally, and yet has no intention of people ruining their whole lives by not being able to deal with the loss. It's kind of fascinating. Some months ago, I guess 3 years ago actually, I was driving down the highway with my son Ross, and I just kind of come out and I said, Ross, what would happen if David died today? That's his son and my grandson. And I mean, it's like I'd hit him, you know, and he went into a state of agitation. He said, why would you even say such a thing? I said, because it could happen today. I mean, how were you prepared for that? What would you do? And he wasn't. I mean, obviously, we hadn't talked about it enough. And you look around and you say, who really is? Who really is? And yet to think about this, to talk about it, to read about it, I think is terribly important, because I know that I and a lot of people in my life have found an incredible amount of peace in that and have been able to suffer, endure, experience losses without a whole lot of pain. And oftentimes people might say, well, you know, it has no feelings there. No, they've been utilized, you know, previously. I have a thing called open palm theory that came out of my experience with a death and dying seminar that I might have mentioned last week. In fact, I'm certain I did. A realization that typically, unconsciously, even consciously sometimes, we tend to cling very carefully to what's ours. You know, I mean, we really got a good hold on our children and our spouse and sweetheart and on our house and our car and our jewelry. You know what I mean? We got it right in here.
Things that are so important.
Yeah, in fact, we've got such a tight grip, I think, sometimes that we really can't appreciate them. Can't even see them in there. You know what I'm saying? In other words, we're so interested in controlling and having and making sure everything's okay. And a long time ago, I would say probably now it's been 8 or 9 years, perhaps, or more, when I decided I wasn't going to do that anymore. And I was going to start pressing my hands open ever so gradually, you know what I mean? Pressing them open and realizing that someone, anyone, everyone, including myself, could possibly die right now. I mean, it's possible that someone that's so precious to me could be dead now, and I haven't heard about it yet because I'm here. You know what I mean? That's a reality. That's possible. That it's probable. See, I take another step. It's probable that someone, everyone, everything, something, myself included, will not be there sooner than I expect. It's never when you expect. You know what I'm saying? And it's positive that someone, everyone, okay, something, everything, will not be there. Okay? And at first I think, oh, what a morbid way to look at things. But I'll tell you, you can appreciate what you got more.
Yes.
I know, for example, I mentioned earlier, in fact, last week, about my grandson moving from the state. And we came here specifically to support his dad, who was a single parent, to nurture Dave and bring him up and what have you. But life goes on, and jobs and careers and what have you caused him to move away. And in the moment I heard about it, I understood that it was possible, even probable, that I would never see David again. know what I'm saying? And so I began to process that and to say goodbye to him, to make sure that we'd cleaned up any acts that we might have had together, and to say goodbye in the best possible way. And in truth, I cannot experience any pain. It's okay. Because the essence of David is as real now that he's in New York as it was when he was in Sutter Creek. You understand what I'm saying? Or in Grass Valley, or for that matter, down the street. I don't think sometimes we acknowledge that the essence of a person, like I have grandchildren I haven't seen for a long time, and yet I know there may be some who doubt it, but I love them as dearly and think of them as frequently as I do David, who was here every day. You know what I mean? In other words, the essence is what we really are captivated by.
What you've kept in your mind.
Exactly.
The thoughts that you cherish.
And all of that. And so each time, as a matter of fact, even prior to that, each time I was with him or with anyone that I find precious, that when we separate, I attempt to say goodbye, okay, and clean up any misunderstandings that there might be, realizing I may never see them again, or they may never see me. And so to be able to clean that up, and so you live in this state of if everything is okay. For example, I remember when my last wife's daddy died. I mean, he was the masculine center of her universe, and that was okay. I mean, they loved one another without any reservation, consideration. You know what I mean? Yeah, it was a good relationship. And I was concerned when he died how she might manage that because of how close they were. But I was in Dallas, and she had gone to where he was at the time, and just a few moments after he died, she called me on the phone, and she said, Bern, Daddy just died. I wish you could have been here. It was wonderful. And I never saw her in bereavement or grieving. There was a time, I think it was 3 or 4 months after he died, that she just said, well, matter of fact, one day, you know, I feel closer to Daddy than I think I ever have in my life. And that's nice. Yeah, the fact that now there was no fear, none, no possibility of discord or misunderstanding. It was pure. And that's fascinating. And yet I find people who have a lot of stuff going on just are terribly anguished when someone dies. And like I say, that's why it's so important to get into the moment as frequently as possible and to go through that process of forgiving, making amends, okay, saying goodbye, and I love you. Just doing it on a regular basis. Now some people, you know, the self-fulfilling prophecy. People say, well, if I make a will, that means I'm going to die soon and what have you. No, I don't believe that. I don't think that. As a matter of fact, I think it can go the other way around. That if we embrace death, we got a better chance of staying alive longer, or at least living while we're alive. And I think, isn't that what's important? Living while we're alive.
I think that's so true, Bern, and that's certainly what I get from what you're saying, and I don't think we often stop and think about that as we should. How precious each moment is, and how fragile each gift in our life is. Yes.
Tell you one thing, too, in this funeral process, I think we have to be aware of a couple, 3 things. A funeral should reflect who the person was. Quite candidly, if old Uncle Charlie was a drunk, he enjoyed hanging around down at the bar, you know what I mean, and that was who Charlie was, there'd be nothing wrong in having services there, and maybe having a beer. You know what I mean? In other words, that is not wrong.
Have it be appropriate?
Yeah, but you know, sometimes we take Uncle Charlie and we put him into a cathedral someplace, and we deify him, and we talk about Charlie in a way that no one who knew him recognizes who they're talking about. They thought they got into the wrong funeral. You know what I mean? In other words, who is this person really? What were his favorite jokes? What were his favorite music? You know what I mean? What did he really like to do? I know some years ago in Dallas, there was a young high school kid who was killed in a car wreck, and he was an astounding young pitcher. And so their services was on the mound, when he was there, he was at his peak. That's where he wanted to be. And he had a promising future. And so his services were right on the pitcher's mound. And the people were there, and it was perfectly adequate. I think we have to think in those terms. Another thing, some years ago, I was doing some counseling. I was in the pre-arrangement business. I think I might have mentioned that before. I sat in a person's home one night. Mom and Dad were sitting there, and they had just made pre-arrangements. You know, they had made these arrangements so that the family wouldn't be burdened with making those choices, spending that money when the time came. I mean, you're talking an ultimate love act when you think about it. I mean, everything's all taken care of, but you do what you want. You know what I mean? But this has been taken care of. And I said, is there anything else that you would like that we haven't addressed. And the woman said, well, as a matter of fact, there is. I really wish we could do all of this at home. I said, what do you mean? Well, I mean, to have the viewing, have guests, you know, this kind of thing. And I said, oh, by all means, that's what you should do then. You should mean we can? You know, that's something that's passé now. People don't do that anymore. You know, it's all done at the funeral home. But you know, if you say, look, I want to have all this in my home, and by the way, there's some clear evidence that if the bereaved is going to continue in the home, you know, continue living there, that probably the nicest thing they can do for themselves in the home is to have the services there, because the home lets go. I mean, there's a sort of there's a finality to that, a so-called closure. Yeah, exactly. So that would be very appropriate. Yeah, I think it's important that we identify our favorite music and songs so that people can recognize that's who we were in that respect. Then one thing we can't ignore too, pets. We cannot deny a owner of a pet, the master of a pet. We cannot deny them all of this process. I mean, I've seen bereavement that was so severe from the loss of a pet. Now, I know someone outside objectively would say, well, get a life, come on, you know, it's a cat. But I'll tell you, not to that person. You know, they were loved without reservation, without consideration. There was communication of sorts there. Terribly, terribly important. And I can tell you how important. I'm going to change names to protect, you know, the reputation and what have you. But some years ago, I was doing Bottlenecks of Bereavement in seminar. And we got to the subject of pets, and these people acknowledged that they had recently lost a dog. And by the way, we're going to call them Bill and Mary, couple. I mean, Hollywood couple, good-looking people, successful, and they were there. And they said they'd lost their dog and couldn't find him and concluded he was dead, and they went through a lot of this process and felt good about it. Someone else contributed something in the room. And it went to another, and then another. And all of a sudden, I realized something was going on over here with Bill. And I turned, and he was like in a state of bereavement. I mean, really thick. And he was saying something. And I listened, and he said, but I could never let go of my bunny. I said, bunny? Bill, what is this about? He said, I could never let go of my bunny. And he was really upset. And I said, when did this happen? He said, when I was 6. He said, I let my bunny die. I mean, you know, and from the outside, I mean, anybody, it was an Easter bunny probably, and anybody would say, get a life, guy, let's move on with this, you know. But he was in bereavement about that, and I said, Bill, who laid that on you? Parents, siblings? I mean, did you do that to yourself? He said, oh, no, it was my fault. I let him die. See, he ignored the bunny, and it had starved. It died. And he was upset, and then he was babbling. You know, sometimes they do that. And he said, and when I was 18, he says, I went and got a vasectomy. So I couldn't have any children because I knew I'd be irresponsible and they would probably die. Well, his Mary had never heard of the bunny. And therefore had never heard of the vasectomy. They've been married 14 years.
And she'd wondered why.
Yeah. And I mean, I figured, whoa, we got a problem here. And they left, and I tried to call all weekend and couldn't connect. I mean, it was answering service and busies and what have you. And I was really concerned for them, because that's major. And Monday, they called and said, we got to get together. And I said, great, because I wanted to hear about the bunny. And they got together, and they had processed. They'd gone through the things that we've been talking about and processed it and felt pretty good about it. But more importantly, they had worked on their marriage. And he had been able to convey to her that he truly loved her, but admitted that in his dating process, he was very careful not to date women who could have children. Not those who didn't want them, because they could change their mind, but women who couldn't have children. And that was how he narrowed, you know, his dating process, and fortunately found Mary. Like I say, these are aliases, but found Mary, and they were delightfully happy together, and still are, by the way. But that's pretty traumatic. I mean, he would say, well, geez, come on, I'm smarter than that. Well, intelligence, again, doesn't have anything to do with it. Menachem Begin, have you ever heard of Menachem Begin, a leader of his country, a warrior in any sense of the word, spoke fluently in 7 languages, a leader of his nation, and I think it was about 13, 14 years ago, his wife died, and we never heard from him again. He was, you know, the guy in Jerusalem, in Israel, and we never heard from him again, but he just died about 3 years ago. Knows for 15, or for 8 to 15 years, he was in bereavement. Knows he was never able to manage that. Things are going on right today where people are trapped. I was reading just the other day, I think it was Jimmy Stewart was having a lot of trouble with the loss of his sweetheart and is just isolated, confined. Liza Minnelli, I mean, this is a famous person. You'd think everything was going fine, but her life was not working. In fact, it was working much like her mom's had. Drugs, broken relationships, this kind of thing. And finally, you know, because of that, she turned herself into Betty Ford Clinic, and while there, they found she was in bereavement for Judy Garland, her mom. And she was the oldest daughter, the oldest child, and when Judy Garland died, she had to assume all the responsibility. She had to be strong, she had to endure, she had to make the arrangements, and so she never got a chance to participate, to grieve. And here it was years later having to take care of it, and came out of the clinic saying that everything was different, everything was better, you know what I mean, because of that process. Some other things too, we really have to be careful of. The family plot, you've heard of that, where, you know, Granddad years ago bought a plot in Omaha, Nebraska, and no matter where anyone dies in the world, their body's shipped home and buried in the family plot. And that's sweet, I mean, that's nice, and yet, where should the body be buried? You know, it should be close to the bereaved. So indeed, if they need to go to the graveside and to visit, and I mean, what should we be doing at the graveside?
Going
Forgiving,
through the process.
making amends,
Yes.
saying goodbye, and say, I love you, no question. Some years ago, I had a young man who we had adopted into our life. I loved perhaps as much as my own children, and they understood that. His name was Ben. And one day I got a phone call from a fellow named Jack Atwood, and told me that Ben died that day. And I said, really? I mean, how? And he was electrocuted in his home, crossed swords with a air conditioner. And when he told me, I remember looking for the pain, like I had with my father and hadn't felt it. And there wasn't any. And when I hung up, I went and told my wife, and she cried, because she and Ben had a lot of considerations between them. I still didn't feel anything, so I took a walk and talked out loud to Ben. Came home, and still it was okay. I mean, I had let him go, evidently. But I sat down, I wrote a letter to Ben. I wrote a letter to his bride, his wife, who I think was 13 years, and wrote a letter to an unborn baby. It was to be born within 2 months.
Oh, my.
And trying to bring up stuff, trying to bring up the pain and to confront it. But it was okay. I had let Ben go and didn't feel the need to go to the funeral in Dallas. And about a year later, had occasion to go to Dallas. Jack picked me up at the airport and said, where are you going to stay? And I told him over at the lake, like always, so I can run. And he said, okay. I said, but I have to visit first. And he said, oh, you mean Ben? Because he knew. And I said, yep. So we drove to the cemetery. Had some trouble finding the grave. And when we found it, it was unkept, therefore unvisited. And so I said, how's Frances doing? He says, tough. And I wasn't surprised. She wasn't managing this properly. But at any rate, I excused myself. Jack drove away, allowing me half an hour, 45 minutes. And I stood by the grave, and I did all my stuff. In other words, I forgave him again, but I'd already handled all of that. And I made amends, but I had already handled all of that, so it was okay. And I said goodbye, and I'd said that many times, and I re-expressed my love for him in present tense. And Jack returned, and I got in the truck, and it's been okay ever since. I think we have the capacity for this. And it doesn't discount life. It doesn't disqualify it in any way. I think it's a greater appreciation of it. But once again, like I say, not until we're comfortable with death and dying are we ever going to be comfortable with life and living. I would like to think when the day comes that perhaps a doctor says to me, Byrne, you better make some arrangements. You've got 6 months to live. I could say, wow, that's cool. I didn't know I had that much time when I came in here. You know what I mean? How do you do that, Doc? You know what I mean? Are you sure?
Right.
Because I have seen people who were in pre-bereavement. I mean, wringing their hands and wrenching their hearts about someone who was terminal. And guess what? They died first. You understand what I'm saying? They died first. And so So you're terminal, Gina. I'm sorry, but you're out of here, and so am I.
Right.
It's just a matter of time. You know what I'm saying? And that has to be okay. That has to be okay. Some other issues here. We've talked about the open palm. Oh, and the closed casket. The non-viewing of the body. You know, unviewable. Don't buy it. Because if there's ever a need, go for it. Because just to see a portion of a hand, for example, that's properly veiled or whatever, would be enough to know. A burn victim beyond recognition, not to the loved one. There's an aura there, sort of an essence that you will know that's your loved one. Terribly important process. Let's talk very briefly about divorce and separation. Surely you can see that in a divorce or separation, you're going to have to forgive.
Yes.
You're going to have to make amends. You're going to have to say goodbye to what was, what could have been, what should have been, and I love you. Now, I talk to a lot of people who are in the throes of divorce and say, love? No way. But what they're really doing is they're in a fear mode which causes them to be angry in order to be right, in order to separate. And the best way of separating is to say goodbye. I love you. You know what I mean? To let that be the way it is. And so it's the same process. Loss of a job or business. Someone participated in that. There was a stroke of a legislative pen, has to be forgiven. Maybe someone postured politically or personally in such a way to cause you to lose the job. You're going to have to forgive them. Where were they at the time? In a love mode? Probably not. You know, they were trying to survive, and you got caught in the mesh, you know. And so there's forgiveness and making amends, I love you, and goodbye to the job, to the income, to whatever it was. What's the alternative? To get stuck, to not be able to function.
Part of the process of forgiveness is also forgiving ourselves.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. And that's the making of amends, too.
Yeah.
You know, you've got to admit that I played a part in this, and I'm sorry for that role, and I want you to forgive me, and I forgive myself. Oh, yes. I was trying to think if there's anything else that... a slight little thought about cremation. I can't be against cremation. It's too popular in our country. I'm against immediate cremation, you know, before the viewing, before the preparation, before the visitation, before this time. But I've been around for a while, could be mistaken, just never met one, never met anybody in the funeral business. In other words, never met a mortician, never met a funeral director, cemetery owner, who was ever cremated. I would think that's a clue. You know what I mean? They don't do that.
Why is that?
Respect for the body. I think they've seen too much pain because of it. Too much rapid isolation, separation. I think, yeah, they have. In fact, most of them, it seems to me, they're opting for mausoleum, which is the ultimate, you know, that's
above ground.
Yeah, above ground burial. And so now there is a major cost here. There's no question, and yet it's a major issue. In other words, how much does it cost to be born? And what is the most traumatic impact in our life, the birth or the death? I think probably the death. And it should be celebrated in a certain way, and I think preparation should be made, certainly, to be able to handle that. If not, we have a mind that can manage it. It's just not as good, not as sound, as if we can do it properly. Cremation after the proper service, can't condemn that, certainly. My mother was cremated. That's what she wanted. I did it. I wouldn't do it again. I can stand at the graveside. My father was buried, my mother was cremated, and there's a different feeling, there's a different sense. You know what I mean? This was much too traumatic, much too, you know, rapid somehow. I sense there's a difference. Because I tell you, all these things combine into who we are, how we think, how we function. You know what I mean? And so that's pretty important. Do you have any questions, any comments about anything we've covered?
Well, I think that that you had mentioned last week that we could write a letter to everyone about who we are and saying goodbye. And I'm wondering if there are other exercises that we can do like that to prepare ourselves. Because I was thinking, what a great thing to do to write a letter to people that you have lost. Besides just saying it, but maybe going through the process of writing your feelings down. And
oh, there's no question. And what a precious gift, too, to give. Remember how the letter started? You think I can find it?
That would be great.
I'm dying today.
Yes.
I'm dying today, and before I die, I'd like you to know who I am.
I'd like you to know who I am.
Yeah, and then just write it to whoever, and as many as you choose. And because you probably would say something different to each one. Most of us would. I just got stuck, and I wrote a general one, and then applied it to everybody. But I think, and to address the issue. I mean, and for heaven's sakes, talk about it with people, especially those who are dying. People are so isolated when they're terminal that people won't look at them, they won't talk about it, they won't wonder, and then there's a point, by the way, of saying it's okay to die. I have a young friend in Kansas City, Missouri, who came day after day and reported his father's pain. And I said, well, have you ever told him that it's okay to die? Because he may be holding on for your sake. Maybe he's holding on because he doesn't want to hurt you. Have you told him that it's okay to go on? And he said, no. Should I do that? And I said, hey, I would if he's that's in that much pain. And so this was, I believe, on a Thursday. And Monday he came in and said, Bern, I can't believe it. Friday I told my daddy, I held his hand, I said, Daddy, if you're holding on for me, you don't have to. I'm prepared to say goodbye. I miss you, I love you, but it's okay. You can go on if you want. And he said he was dead in an hour. He was gone in an hour. And he said, I don't know if that was it or not, but it's okay. And he felt good about it. There's some power in these tools. See, here's the thing. You've heard, I've heard, that people just have to do it their own way. People each have their own way of grieving. And I'm contending it's because they haven't been given a way to do it. And these processes that we've been talking about accelerate in such a way that we can come up on the other side healthy and happy and functional. And really, that's what it's all about. Because, this whole thing is about life, living, and making a living. And it's called Life Talk. And our number is 1-800-661-3490. And I see, my name is Bern.
Moses.
Thank you, Gina.
Thank you, Bern.